The night was heavy with the smell of gunpowder and rain. In the dim light of a broken street lamp, Lee lay motionless, his breath shallow, his hand pressed tightly against the wound on his shoulder. The bullet had missed his heart barely, but the pain still burned like fire under his skin. Somewhere far away, the echoes of gunfire faded into silence, leaving only the rhythm of his heartbeat, uneven and uncertain. He thought of Sam. Her face flashed in his mind, the warmth of her smile, the soft curve of her hand on his cheek the night he left. "Promise me you'll come back," she had whispered, her voice trembling. He had smiled back, full of confidence then, unaware of how close he'd come to never keeping that promise. But Lee had survived. The wound was deep, yet not fatal. After days of hiding in an abandoned warehouse, he managed to contact his unit, and with their help, was rescued and brought back to the border. To everyone else, it was a miracle, a story of survival and resilience. But what no one knew, not even to Sam, was that his survival came with a price. When the bullet grazed him, Lee lost more than blood, he lost his freedom. The men who found him in the jungle were not his own. They were part of an underground network that wanted him alive, not to save him, but to use him. They nursed him back to health, offered shelter, and waited for him to regain strength. Then, when he least expected it, they trapped him not with chains, but with manipulation, blackmail, and secrets too dangerous to reveal. Meanwhile, Sam, still unaware of the truth, waited every night by the window, hands resting gently on her growing belly. She prayed for his return, never imagining that Lee, the man she loved, was alive, but imprisoned by a new kind of enemy. The bullet had missed his heart, but fate had found another way to wound him. And somewhere between love and deception, Lee was fighting not only to survive, but to find his way back to her once again. Days blurred into nights, and nights into endless shadows. Lee had survived the bullet, but now he lived in a prison without walls, one built from lies and control. The people who saved him called themselves the Brotherhood. On the surface, they appeared to be freedom fighters, men with noble causes and brave hearts. But soon, Lee realized their motives were darker than he could have imagined. They wanted information, government routes, secret contacts, and access to the same missions Lee once led. When he refused, they reminded him of his wound, his weakness, and his isolation. He had no communication with the outside world. His phone was gone. His uniform had been burned. To them, Lee no longer existed. Yet, every night, when silence fell and the flickering light of an oil lamp painted the walls gold, he would close his eyes and picture Sam. He imagined her laughter, the way she tilted her head when she teased him, the warmth of her breath when she leaned close to say his name. That memory became his only strength, the invisible thread that kept his heart beating. Meanwhile, far away in their small home, Sam was fighting her own battle. Her pregnancy had entered its final months, but the loneliness was heavier than her body could bear. Every letter she sent was returned unopened. Every attempt to contact his unit ended with the same cold answer. "We regret to inform you that Captain Lee has gone missing in action." Still, she refused to believe it. At night, when the wind rustled through the bamboo fence, she whispered softly to the life growing inside her belly, "Your father is strong. He'll come back to us," he promised. Back in that hidden camp, Lee stared at the night sky through the small crack in the roof, searching for the same stars she looked at, the only connection left between them. Deep down, he knew that surviving the bullet wasn't the end of his struggle. It was just the beginning of a darker war, one that could destroy everything he loved if he couldn't escape it in time. 3 months passed. The wound on Lee's body had healed, but the wound in his soul only deepened. He was forced to work with the Brotherhood, a group that manipulated hope into obedience. They claimed they were protecting their homeland, but every mission they ordered reeked of revenge and betrayal. Lee obeyed only enough to survive. Every night, he secretly drew maps of their base and wrote coded letters to send to his old unit. But each message vanished into silence. Someone intercepted them. Someone wanted him to stay invisible. One evening, a man named Rico, who seemed kinder than the rest, whispered, "They're using you, Captain. You think they saved your life, but they only saved your body to use your name." Lee stared at him, his jaw tight. "Then I'll make them regret it," he said quietly. At that moment, far away in the small riverside town, Sam gave birth to a baby boy. Her body was weak, her face pale, but when she heard the first cry of her child, tears streamed down her cheeks. She whispered through the pain, "Lee, our son, he's here. You have to come back." But fate remained cruel. The day her son was born, a false report reached the base. Lee had died in an explosion. The military sent her his medal, a folded flag, and a simple note. He died a hero. Sam fell to the floor, clutching the medal to her chest, her cries echoing through the empty room. To her, the world stopped spinning. But the truth was far more complicated. Lee wasn't dead. That explosion was a staged operation by the Brotherhood to erase his name from every database, ensuring no one would look for him again. And as Sam buried a flag in place of a body, Lee was being transported deeper into the mountains, toward another hidden base, another prison. He thought he was close to freedom, but he had just stepped into the second trap, one far colder than bullets and blood. It was a trap made of deception, designed to break not his body this time, but his heart. The mountain base was nothing like the first. Cold wind sliced through the narrow stone corridors, and armed guards watched Lee's every move. There was no horizon here, only the gray of rock and the echo of chains. Days blurred together. They made him build, plan, and teach strategy to soldiers who didn't even know what they were fighting for. He realized the truth too late. The Brotherhood wasn't a rebellion. It was a network of mercenaries, serving whoever paid the most. Still, Lee endured. He kept pretending, obeying, and listening in, till one night, he overheard a voice through the wall. The woman, Sam. She had the child, right? Yes, but she believes he's dead. That's what keeps her quiet. Lee froze. His breath stopped. The world spun around him. He pressed his hand to the wall, feeling his heart pounding beneath his ribs. "Alive," he whispered, his voice trembling. "She's alive, and we have a child." That night, he tried to escape. Crawling through mud and wire, dodging guards, he reached the outer fence, but a trap had been waiting. A sharp pain burned through his shoulder as a tranquilizer dart struck him. The last thing he saw before collapsing was the cold face of Rico, the man who had once warned him. "You were never supposed to know," Rico muttered. "Some love stories end better when they never meet again." When Lee woke, he was chained to a hospital bed. His wounds were real this time, his body weak, his spirit even weaker. They injected something into his veins every morning, something that made his memories blur, his will fade, and yet, one thing remained clear through the fog to Sam's face, her smile, the warmth of her hands. He started to write her name on the wall every day, even when his hands trembled. "To Sam, wait for me." Meanwhile, in the small town, Sam stood by the window, holding her baby in her arms. The boy had Lee's eyes, his calm gaze. Every night, she looked up at the stars and whispered, "If you're out there, come home. Even if you don't remember me, come home." The distance between them wasn't just miles, anymore it was time, memory, and fate itself. Lee survived the bullet, but now he was fighting a quieter, crueler war, one against the shadows that wanted him to forget the woman who still waited for him in the light. And somewhere deep in his fading heart, a small flame refused to die. It whispered her name again and again like a prayer. "To Sam, I'll find my way back to you." Love, at its purest, is not always about being together, it is about surviving for one another, even when the world builds walls in between. The story of Lee and Sam teaches us that sometimes, the greatest war is not fought with weapons or blood, but within the human heart, against despair, fear, and the cruel passage of time. Lee survived the bullet, yet he fell into another kind of prison, one made of manipulation, lies, and memory. And in that silent war, he proved something that many forget. Survival is not just about breathing. It's about holding on to something that gives life meaning. For Lee, that meaning was to Sam. Every time he wrote her name on the wall, he was defying the darkness that wanted to consume him. To Sam, too, carried a quiet strength that only love could give. Alone, pregnant, and abandoned by fate, she chose not to curse the world, but to wait with hope. She raised her child not in bitterness, but in tenderness, whispering stories about a man who once promised the stars. In doing so, she showed that love is not defined by possession, it's defined by faith. Faith that somewhere, somehow, the soul you love is still fighting to return. The world often tests love through separation, misunderstanding, and pain. We are made to believe that distance kills connection, that forgetting is easier than holding on. But this story reminds us that true love doesn't vanish, it transforms. It becomes memory, strength, and purpose. Even when Lee was forced to forget, something deep inside him refused to let go. Love became his last piece of freedom. In life, we all face invisible traps: fear, loss, the temptation to give up when hope seems too far away. But if we remember what we're living for, if we hold on to the people who give meaning to our days, we can endure almost anything. Like Lee, we may lose everything: our freedom, our way home, even our memories, but love will always leave a trace too deep to erase. And like to Sam, we must learn to wait without losing ourselves. Waiting is not weakness, it is quiet courage. It is the belief that no matter how many storms tear through our lives, love will always find its way back, perhaps not in the same form, but in a way that reminds us why we endured in the first place. So, the lesson is simple, yet profound. Even when fate pulls you apart, even when life feels cruel and uncertain, never stop believing in love that is real. Because real love does not need to be perfect, or even possible, it only needs to be true. And truth, like light, always finds its way through the darkest of nights. When we look closer at the story of Lee and to Sam, we realize that their love was not about grand gestures or perfect timing. It was about endurance. It was about the quiet resilience of two hearts that refused to stop beating for each other, even when life tore them apart. Lee's survival from the bullet wasn't just a physical victory, it was a spiritual awakening. Sometimes life spares us not because we are lucky, but because there is something left unfinished, a word unsaid, a promise unkept, or a love that still needs to be proven. For Lee, that unfinished chapter was to Sam. Though his body recovered, his heart remained trapped between duty and desire, memory and loss. In those moments of confusion, Lee's greatest battle was not against his captors, but against the emptiness that came from forgetting. Yet, love, that fragile, invisible force, left its mark. It whispered through his dreams, appeared in fragments of his memory, and guided him through the pain. This teaches us that even when love is buried under distance, fear, or time, it never dies completely. It hides, it waits, and sometimes, it returns when we least expect it. To Sam's part in this story is equally powerful. She represents the quiet heroism of those who wait, not in weakness, but in faith. Every night she lit a candle for Lee, not knowing if he was alive, yet refusing to let the flame die out. That small act of hope in the face of despair is what keeps love alive in a world full of uncertainty.